Thank you for this lovely event, and particularly thank you to Julie, Maria and their colleagues for having the vision to be the first country in the world to launch their own branch of the Mathematical Resilience Network. I'll explain a bit more about what that means, but this is amazing and we're delighted to be here. So what we want to do today, which we've already started, is to begin to understand what we can do about maths anxiety for our pupils of different abilities and the adults around them. So as you've heard from my colleagues, a lot of the parents of our children, a lot of our colleagues in universities have maths or statistics anxiety or avoidance because of their adverse experiences. And part of that process, I suggest, is to build a shared language and a shared strategy. So what the Mathematical Resilience Network is setting out to do, because we've found the tools I'm going to share with you have high degree of effect in various communities around the world, is to suggest that everybody has a go at trying them out and learning what they can from them. And it's not that any of this is new, but what this does is it gives you a structure for thinking about what my colleagues have spoken with you about. And this is a picture, it's quite a sad picture to start with. A unicyclist in London got trapped under a London bus. The number of people in this room helped lift the bus off the cyclist and got him out. And that's intended to empower you with a sense that this problem, which has been written about since at least the 1950s, can be solved if we unite together in a network, in a group, and we start sharing a language and a practice of doing something about it. So that's why that slightly gruesome picture is there, because it's enabled us to think about the power of working in groups and networks. And when we talk about whether it's adverse prior experiences or whether it's trauma with a small t, or even sometimes with one of the people I'm working with, trauma with a big T, it's worth remembering the sort of experiences that some of our students might come to us with, or some of their parents might have experienced. So these are 3 students from my university in England. One of them, Halima, and also Nina, were coming for a resit class. So they were wanting to re-engage as adults in their mathematics so that they could support their children. And one of them said, the teacher would say, "You're no good, you don't understand, you're stupid." And the problem with stupid is it's permanent. And Nina felt she was stupid. Nobody possibly told her that she was stupid, but she had this sense of, I'm never going to get it, I still don't get it. And she came into the lessons with these chills. And Molly, I met on a master's course. So Molly really wanted to be a teacher, but she had severe maths anxiety. Her father would grab her around the neck when she didn't get what he was trying to tell her. So there's a communication gap. And the person who seems to get blamed in these scenarios is the learner. And that's the bit we're trying to shift. We don't want to work out about blame. We want to know what to do about it. And Molly is now a head of geography. I just thought I should tell you, because she learnt the tools. So I do want us to think about mathematics through the lens of trauma and adverse experience. There's a real argument going on about whether we talk about trauma or adverse experience. And I gather you had some sessions here last week about trauma. So with colleagues I'm collaborating with, in Turkey, they're very happy to talk about trauma with a small t, because it's the experience and what it does to your body, and you start to protect yourself from maths. Whereas for others, and I include my Brazilian colleagues, they'd rather talk about adverse experience to not kind of over-dramatise it. And so in Ireland, you've got a choice as to which one you foreground. But we do want to use the trauma-informed practice of the session that you had last week to inform what we're trying to do. So what we're trying to do this day is to create a layer of people who are much more aware about maths anxiety and its prevalence. And then by introducing you to the tools, I'm trying to lift you to level 2, which are practitioners who have some tools to do something with it, something about it. And then, as my colleagues have said, with severe cases, and I don't think that might be more than 1 in 100 or 1 in 200, we might need to refer to our psychology friends. But these tools will give us a lot to help learners just recognise that it's not their fault and there is something they can do about it. But we're not neuroscientists, most of us in this room. Most of us are educators. So I'm talking about psychoeducation, knowing enough psychology to do our job as educators really well, and then to communicate with the psychologists when we need to. So the brain is really good at distinguishing challenge and threat. And if the brain perceives it as challenge, in other words, the brain thinks, I've got this, I can have a go, then the brain will allow the animal, as it were, to go towards this curious thing and explore it. But as soon as the brain perceives threat, the response is, as you said, fight, flight, freeze, it's to run. And this mechanism is 100 million years old, and we have to work with it. And the thing is that it's not just about physical threat. This was a real eye-opener for me, and maybe for yourselves. That being left behind is a threat to your well-being. If you were a monkey and you got left out of your group, you would be in trouble. You'd be picked off by the lions. So being together in the group, not being left behind, is really important for our mental well-being. If you're humiliated, as some of my clients that I've interviewed and asked for their stories, as Maria is doing, to be humiliated in front of a class is to experience a threat. And in England, and I'm hoping you don't do this in Ireland, the Year 7s have just arrived in a new school. They don't know anybody in their class. They're all asked to stand up in some schools, and they can't sit down till they get a sum ride. Now that is an environment that fosters humiliation. And your youngsters and their parents might have experienced something like that. Or if they're shouted at. And we had a middle-aged lady come on our coaching course, and she, after the third session where she felt safe enough to talk with us, she said what she remembered was being 14 years old and girding up her courage to go knock on the staff room door and tell the maths teacher that she couldn't understand it. And she got bawled out in front of all the other 14-year-olds. And that was something she still vividly remembered in her 40s. So Calmo is João Calmo, who's a professor that Telma is working with in Brazil. He's worked on some interventions. He's somebody who specialises in extreme cases. And he writes, many actions and interventions have been tried, including the sort of ones that Maria and Flavia have talked about, mindfulness, managed breathing, and writing. And what João thinks is that the structure I'm going to share with you today has the power and the efficacy to put all that in a simple framework that can be shared more easily. So we're going to talk about how you build mathematical resilience, but it might be worth stopping for a moment to see what we mean by resilience. We've talked about self-efficacy, which is the belief that you can do it, and what Bandura talks about is the need for resilient self-efficacy. So when you experience setbacks, or a bit of panic, or a challenge, or even a threat that you need to take yourself out of, you know what to do with it in order to continue your journey. So Maria mentioned being equipped to learn. In our view, to be equipped to learn, you need to be able to keep yourself safe. And I spoke with somebody, I hope they don't mind me mentioning it, just this morning. One of the secrets of keeping yourself safe is that if you feel you can't do something quickly, it's not you, it's that you need more time. And if your brain is allowing you to say, I need more time, then you will be safe. If you start saying, I'm no good at it, that's when you start losing your mathematical well-being. So Ryan and Decky talk about relatedness, which is about some of you making your students feel at home, feel safe, feel that they can trust you. Autonomy, so that they have the voice to tell you when they're not feeling safe, when this is a threat to them rather than a challenge. And competence, mastery, if you will, which some of you are working on. But that competence includes this element of keeping yourself safe in a maths context. And we suggest that the competence to self-safeguard in a maths situation can be achieved using these three tools: the growth zone model, the hand model of the brain, and the relaxation response. And that sharing that amongst our community will build the resilience that our young people and their parents and your colleagues will need in order to progress with mathematics successfully. So here's the growth zone model. And what it does is encapsulate some of what's been said already. So we all know about our comfort zone, don't we? I know when I feel comfortable and when I step out and I go, uh-oh, this is new, or this is a bit challenging, or this is a bit scary, and your butterflies in your tummy. And initially it's hard to tell the difference between stepping out of your comfort zone into growth or into panic. So even coming here to talk today, there were butterflies in my tummy. But I keep saying to myself and my colleagues, this is not panic, this is butterflies. We're in new territory, it's unfamiliar, it's a challenge, not a threat. We have the support. And we'll talk about in a minute, but you already know, some of you, that to stay in that growth zone and not head into panic, people have said, seek advice, ask for more time, seek support. So we have that sense of knowing how we can stay in that growth space and not step out into, oh my goodness, my life's at risk, or the mental equivalent. And it turns out this is not new, but repackaged thinking. So I've lost the source for this, but it's very old. And it says, when your learners out there are two kinds of circumstance that kind of make them anxious. And it's time when we talk about maths anxiety to separate the two. There's one where the learners can solve on their own with a little bit of assistance, and none's where the level of threat or suffering is beyond their ability to cope. And what we find with primary school teachers, for example, if the children are starting to show anxiety, the teacher will, because we're kind primary school teachers, will wrap the children up in cotton wool and say, never mind, we won't do anything difficult. But if we share this model with the learners, and they learn that there's these two kinds of anxiety, if you like nervousness and panic, or if you like excitement, if we can reinterpret it as excitement or panic, then we don't have to worry about being so overprotective. So this isn't about reducing standards, it's about increasing challenge and managing threat. So what the learners and the adults and whoever we're dealing with need to learn is that stupid is temporary. You're in the red zone, you can't think. And so, yes, I feel stupid, but I can get out of that space, back into a space where my brain works the way it was intended to, and my brain's not trying to save my life, and then I'll be able to do the maths. And how many of us have said, if I step back, give myself time, calm down, I can do it. But that's the message that we need to get out there to everybody, because a lot of people believe that they're stupid and that they'll never be able to learn mathematics. So then they need to learn how to get out of the red zone if they find themselves in it. They need to build and extend their experience of being in the orange zone. So we've got a lot of youngsters who are high achievers who will only go there if they know how to do it already before they start. And they're protecting themselves from not knowing, from struggling, from panic, because they haven't got a lot of growth zone. And that affects even people who come to Warwick, which is one of those universities that asks for A's before you come. You get people who never had to struggle with maths because it was always easy at school, and they don't know what to do if they get stuck. So everybody needs to experience that challenge space while they're going through school. And then we need to encourage the learners to come out of their safe zone and to brave the challenge. And we've interviewed learners who've been introduced to this model, and they say, well, I haven't got an orange zone in maths, I go straight from green to red. Well, that's not a good situation, because the optimal learning space, as Maria said with your first attempt in learning, you're not growing if you're not having a go and sometimes making mistakes or sometimes failing. And so after we've introduced these tools to primary teachers, they might give the children paper tablecloths or something, where you can have a go at a problem, ask for help, and then when you're sure you've got the answer, then you put it in your neat book, or whatever that process is. So the green zone is the sort of space where you'd set the homework. You wouldn't want the children or the teenagers to be stuck on the maths if they can't access the support. So the idea of setting increasingly difficult homework without introducing them to this model is unsafe. We have to help the learners understand that unless they've got the internet, unless they've got each other, chat groups, whatever it is, or a parent who can help if they get stuck, they don't want to be getting stuck on their own at home, because that's where the relatedness is needed and the sense of support and being able to handle challenge. So the danger zone, the red zone, is where what's being asked is not within the learner's reach yet. And that we adopt Carol Dweck's word yet, which is a really powerful word. Even with support, your mathematical well-being is under threat, you need to get out of there. And there's hardly any learning going on, we don't want them in the red space. There's a lovely web URL, which I think Julie's already got, but we can share, about a parent learning about this model, and she usually had a row with her, I think, 9-year-old daughter every time they tried to sit down and do maths homework. And she learned this model, and shared it with the child, and they started with the beginning of a row, and the girl said, "Where's that circle diagram?" And she got the circle diagram. She said, "This one's in my not yet zone, the red zone. I want a task that's in my orange zone." So she labelled the whole of the red zone not yet, which means it's a place to explore as I get older and learn more skills, which is absolutely right. But she knew that to be well and to maintain her growth, she needed to stay in the orange zone. And there was no row. So Seligman, a lot of this comes from positive psychology, because if we keep talking about maths anxiety, we'll frighten everybody to death. We need to talk about something positive, and that's why we're talking about resilience. To build resilience, the learner needs to understand this fundamental message. You're not stupid, you're panicking. Panic's temporary. You can get out of there, and then you'll be fine. So that's the message I'm hoping everybody will share with whoever is around them. So the characteristics of cultivating this orange zone, I think a lot of us are doing it already, but we don't talk about the red zone. And if we don't know about the red zone, and only a couple of people fall into it, then we have a quote from Brené Brown: "If nobody's talking about it, it must be you. I'm the only one that's got into the red zone. I must be the stupid one. Because everybody else is finding this nice and comfortable and challenging, and not me." So we need to talk about the fact that I'm trying to challenge you. I'm trying to make sure you learn more maths. But if you get to red zone, just let me know, and we can carry on with more bravery. Not quite safety, because safe is the green zone, but brave, the brave zone. So the brave zone needs to be a space where learners can make mistakes, they can get stuck, they can require support, they get tired, and we've got teachers who've learned about this, who put posters up around their classrooms that say, "Are you stuck yet? That's good, because now we can learn some new mathematics." And learning to do what you do when you get stuck. So the growth zone includes 4 ingredients to stay in it safely. One of those, as somebody has mentioned already, I think it was Flavia, is the growth mindset. And that gets mistranslated sometimes. Of course you can do maths, just keep trying. But what we actually mean by the growth mindset is maths is like a muscle. You use it, it grows. If you don't use it, it doesn't grow. Yeah, that's the essence of the growth mindset. So that maths ability is not fixed, it's increasable. Struggle, so that you don't have to do maths quickly and easily, which is the kind of message we purvey somehow certainly in British and Irish culture, the idea that unless you're good at maths quickly, you're not really good at maths. But actually, it takes effort to grow those new neurons. Value, so important. Ryan and Decky talk about autonomous motivation. You might already have heard of intrinsic motivation. Autonomous motivation is the next best thing. It's not somebody saying, you've got to do it because it's on the syllabus, which is kind of out there, away from the child, but it's how you bring the relevance of mathematics to the importance of the learner in front of you. So I've got a lady who taught year 8 in England, and the kids said, as they do, "Why are we learning Pythagoras' theorem?" So she stopped the lesson and she got them to think about all the skills that they'd learned during that lesson that an employer would value, even if the employer didn't need to use Pythagoras' theorem. So things like communicating the results, being able to use a formula, but obviously maybe not that one. And the children understood the autonomous value of the maths that they were learning. The problem is that a lot of maths teachers don't know enough about the value and applications of mathematics, and they do it because they like the maths, and that's not the experience of the general public. So we have to understand what maths looks like when people are using it, and that's part of what Flavia's video brings on. And that the importance of support and relatedness, being able to recruit support, and we just heard that not everybody is prepared to reach out for support when they're stuck at maths, because they're ashamed. And that's the bit, again, it's not you, we need to talk about it, and being able to recruit support is a part of that growth zone and being in that space. And we want to talk about that with the learners. So Thelma and I have written a paper which we'd like to share with you. It's freely available, thank goodness. And we've enhanced the model to communicate those 4 elements. You're welcome to get it off the Creative Education website, or just ask and we'll send it to you, send it to Julie. And what it's doing is encapsulating those 4 elements that we need to have in our school learning environments, as well as the awareness of the existence of the red zone, so that we know what to do if we go into the red zone. If you like, we turn the red zone from a cliff, I'm not going to fall off the cliff, to a beach. Oh, I'm getting my feet wet, I need to back off a bit and go a little bit more into a safer space. So that's one of the tools. Another tool that we found really helpful for many, many learners. Have you seen this one already? Has anybody seen it already? The hand model of the brain? Not yet. Okay. You see, I said not yet. Okay. So just hold your hand up with the back of your hand facing your face. And then fold your fingers over. And that's representing your right hemisphere. And obviously, because you're not holding anything in your hand, you could do that with the other hand as well. And that's a model of your brain. So Dan Siegel has produced this. He's a neuroscientist. It just shows how neuroscientists can help us in education. And when your brain is folded over, that represents your brain now. And the thumb represents the brain's alarm system that I talked about, the amygdala area, where previous threats and previous bad situations stored, because the brain wants to keep the mechanisms to keep you alive. Yeah? Keep you out of threat, run away from threat, approach challenge. Okay? So all those memories of bad situations stored in the amygdala. It's all right, we're resilient to the mass monster unless it comes crashing through. And the front part of the hand, the little fingernails, if you like, is the prefrontal cortex, where higher level thinking goes on. And in this situation, our brain might get a little bit distracted, check out what's going on, make sure it's actually relatively safe, and then come back together again. If that scared us, effectively the brain would go offline, the higher level bit, and if it was actually a tiger coming through, your body would be pumped, ready, like it almost is now. What a good timing. You'd be pumped, ready to run or fight, whatever it is, okay? And in that instance, your brain would not be conducive. Sounds more and more human, doesn't it? Would not be conducive to doing mathematics. So you feel stupid in that moment. And it might happen momentarily when you're trying to do something with a spreadsheet. It might happen all the time to you. And the point is, unless you can put your brain back together again, you're no good at maths. But it's a temporary state. And so this hand model of the brain, I've introduced it to the staff and students at Warwick, and other colleagues have introduced it in South Africa and in Turkey. And it's just, you're not stupid, you're panicking, get your brain back together. It kind of presents it more physically than just the growth zone model on its own, but it's really useful. So the key message, the brain can't think clearly and panic at the same time. It's one or the other. And Dan Siegel in his book Mindsight has this lovely example where they're doing a little country walk and suddenly he pushes his son into the edge of the path. He doesn't even know why, because that mechanism is so effective at saving our lives. And then when the brain's back together again, he thinks, what was that about? And there's a fatal snake in front of them. And his amygdala's worked so quickly, the cognitive part of the brain didn't know what was going on. So that's kind of what's happening, is that this bit's very, very fast and it takes over. And there's 2 videos that I point you to. One is Dan explaining the model himself, and he does it better than I do. But the other is me explaining it in a maths context rather than a generic context, because we find that sometimes, unless we teach these skills in a maths context, people learn the skills and then say, but I'm stupid in maths, so there's no point learning them. So now we talk about putting the brain back together, or in other words, getting out of the red zone. And there I would point you to Herbert Benson, a book written in 2000 after 25 years of him working on this in America. And what he says is, if you're panicking, you can trigger the override. You can trigger the relaxation response. I'm just going to do it now because that unnerved me. Breathe in for 5, breathe out for 7. Breathe in for 5 and out for 7. Now, some young people don't like talking about the breathing, it panics them. So I could just say, tell me 5 things you can hear. So I'm bringing your attention to the now, or have an apple to eat. Or if it's really not calming down, go for a walk. So in the school context, here's a red card, go to the support centre and come back in 10 minutes. Because I know kids are given the red card. And these are things that I would call micro-mindfulness, because it's mindfulness, as colleagues have talked about it, of the kind that you can use in a classroom and in an exam. So we had one little lad who learned these techniques with my PhD student who's at Arden University. And he said, I've got maths anxiety, but I know how to deal with it, sir. And he doubled his score the next day because he calmed himself down in the test and then carried on. So isn't that empowering? But don't try to do maths when your brain is on the maths monster. So we're learning that this isn't a cliff, we're not going to fall over, we're not going to die, we're not going to have a tragedy if we get into the red zone, but we are going to get our feet wet. And that metaphor of it being a beach, I want to be on the sand, occasionally I get into the water, I can get back out again, I can dry off, I can recover. So these metaphors are particularly important, and particularly in assessment conditions. I wanted to make a connection for you in case you already know about this model, but there is another model out there which is very similar, but it has a blue zone as well. And this model is higher energy as you go up the diagram, and unpleasant on the left and pleasant on the right. And so you can see that the growth zone is associated with low energy pleasant, and there's lots of words to describe any space in that place. And then as you get high energy, your heart starts pumping. Are you in a pleasant space of challenge, or are you in an unpleasant space of threat? And some work, certainly going on in the UK, with primary school children with emotional regulation using models similar to this. But the problem is, as I alluded to, we might teach these models, but if we don't apply them specifically to maths, we're still left with that problem of you're either good at maths or you're not. We've still got to apply them in mathematics. So, as teachers, how might we build learners' experience of the amber zone, the challenge zone? We might encourage them to ask questions, but if they feel that asking questions is stupid, they might need to work in pairs and not feel quite so threatened to ask a stupid question. We might encourage them to try a simpler example. We might encourage some pupil-pupil talk. And we've run a course for maths research students where they learnt some of these coaching skills, we might call them, and there was a lad who hadn't passed his GCSE yet, which is the 16 plus examination, and he was able to coach an 18 plus student who was stuck using some of these techniques. Recruit help, use the internet, expect to get stuck, expect to make mistakes, use rough work, which for some reason is going out of practice. When I was a kid, we had rough books and neat books, and we need to bring those back and take time. Just have that image of the neurons growing and that they take time to grow. And this is Telma's class in Brazil, because without having met me over the internet, in Brazil, she read about these tools. She said, I'd like to try those. So she had a go. And these are 16-year-old or 17-year-old students. And you have to spend a session out of maths educating them into the model, and part of the difficulty is helping them understand when they're in challenge and when they're in threat, because they're quite similar in terms of arousal, heart rate going up, butterflies, etc. Can you still think, or is your thinking completely impaired? If it's completely impaired, you're in the red zone. And so the learners were building their understanding by putting words for what they would experience and putting them into each zone in the class. So I've offered you a model that helps learners articulate their feelings when they're learning maths. So like the girl who was 9 explaining it to her mum, like Janet's students who were able to use it without the teacher. So some of this work you can do with the child to help them to self-safeguard. And your teaching assistants in school, many of whom have maths anxiety, would rather support English and Irish than they would maths, and your colleagues. And the shared language has to be communicated somehow. So what some teachers have done is put this model on the table and used a penny or a little stone to explain where they're at the moment. The advantage of that is if a teaching assistant comes along and looks at the growth zone on the table, they know whether to have a go at supporting the maths if the stone is in orange, whether to leave them alone or challenge them a bit if they're in green, and to say something completely not maths if the youngster's in red. And what's really difficult is to get maths teachers, maths specialists to stop talking about maths if somebody tells you they're in the red zone, because we kind of believe instinctively that if we keep talking, the learner will get it. But they can't hear you, there's an alarm going off in their head. So that's where you stop and say, what do you need to do to calm down? Shall I come back in 5 minutes or something like that? And you need to think about how you're going to use this in your practice. And you can have posters on the wall, you can buy, some of the teachers have got these plastic stickers you put on tables. There are times when that doesn't work, depending on the age of your students. You've got to be sensitive and use your skills and knowledge about what works with 13-year-olds, what works with 18-year-olds, and what works with 9-year-olds. Because you can get a bit chaotic if you introduce this without thinking to 13-year-olds. I think I've got time to introduce a fourth model, which is really important. And again, it's about not blaming the learner when they can't progress on the right from where they are to where the teacher wants them to be. What the learner needs to be able to say is, I need another rung. Not that I'm stupid, I'm not panicking, I just don't get it. So I need some more rungs. And those rungs might be equipment, as Maria and Flavia have said. It might be you go outside. I've done this with a 15-year-old. Go outside, have a number, move forward the number times 2 because she hasn't understood why equals mx plus c, or whatever it is, and getting Smarties out to teach pie charts. And you see the light bulbs going on because you've put the rungs in for the learner. So we believe every learner can climb from where they are to where you want them to go, but they need time and they need rungs. And there's self-efficacy, there's self-belief that it's not me, I just need another rung. We do have a coaching course that Tamara and I can run online for you and your students or your staff or your parents. We do one-to-one coaching using these models. We support teachers. So the Maths Resilience Network, one of its jobs is to support practitioners who want to have a go at using these tools and then come back, God willing, next year and report how they're getting on. And that's what enables you to become anxiety-informed practitioners. Getting a sense that you have a few tools that you can try out, and then if that doesn't work, you can reach out for support to the network, because you're also going to be in your orange zone. And as Flavia said, every maths teacher in the world is likely to meet a proportion of learners who have maths anxiety. And the current estimate for England in 15-year-olds is about 30%. In the adult population and apprentices and research students, it's that high as well. We haven't a clue really how much it is, because as Maria said, it's on a spectrum, and we can't say, exactly until we start measuring high, medium, and extreme maths anxiety. But we do know that this is interfering in what you're trying to do with the learners. That's a kind of statement for you in Ireland. This is what we want to do: build awareness, develop a shared language, enable your learners' autonomy, encourage communities that don't ever think anybody can't do maths, never leave people behind, building growth mindsets. And this is really important. I've spoken to somebody today who thought everybody knew it wasn't them, that they needed more time or that they needed a bit more explanation. But if you don't talk about it, then the learner assumes it's them that's the problem. That's really important. And these were mums in the centre of England. They were relieved to hear that maths anxiety is real. They weren't the only ones to have it. They weren't the only ones who felt physically sick before maths lessons. They loved the approach that we're introducing about mathematical safeguarding, and they hadn't thought about it as being about healing the historic trauma or adverse experiences. And so you can imagine the sort of impact that that had on their parenting. And we're going to build the networks. We're going to support you to build the networks. This one in Ireland is the first. Brazil will be second when these two when Tom gets home. And I've got some readings for you to follow up in the PowerPoint, which I believe is going to be shared. Thank you very much.